Well, welcome to what was supposed to be my promised lecture on Chapter 8. Had some health issues, had to have a colonoscopy yesterday and things like that, so I was like off or out of work for a while. I was basically out of pocket the entire weekend, getting ready for that and doing some other things. So got in here this morning, Tuesday, the 10th, and got to looking at Chapter 8, and there's really not a lot to lecture about because if you go through all of the little examples. It's just building on what we've already done using some picture objects. Uh, there's a couple of things that I'll get into later about how to use the assembly, which is the entire project, to store images and strings as a resource. And if you want to do it this way, it will store them in the exe. Now, it does make the exe bigger, but if you're not talking about very many images or strings, it's really not a big deal. The beauty of that is the user can move the application around on his hard drive and not break it, because if you do an install, obviously, which you can do a second project in here for that. Microsoft has an installer. Then you'll link it and it'll put them in a directory for you to grab. But the problem is if the user moves or breaks the directory structure, then you've got an issue. Of course, your try catch will handle it, but the program won't work. So if it's just a small amount of data, I'll put it in a resource file, and that way it compiles in the exe. First thing I want to talk to you about is if you've seen the announcement in the email, I had an error in the printable course schedule. I had the right page number for Project 8, but I left the 0 off, so it looks like you're working on program problem 1, which is a word counter. That's on 537. It should have been Project 10, or excuse me, Problem 10 for Project 8, which is a Morse code converter. So, since I didn't do a lecture on the chapter, I thought I'd give you a little help on the actual project, because this one's got some weird stuff going on. A lot of you probably already thought about this, well, if you even knew about it, because it's probably the wrong project for you. The first thing I want to tell you, if you flip over to page 538, you will see the codes there, and space is a space, a comma is a dash dash dot dot dash dash, and it goes all the way through. 0, well, it's got a comma period question mark, 0 through 9, and then uppercase A through uppercase Z. Now, lowercase is the same value, so that kind of helps you out a little bit. Notice M. They show something that looks like 3 dashes. That's not correct, and this is according to my Guide to Codes and Signals. It says International Flag Code, Secret Ciphers, Weather Signals, Morse Code, so that's where I got it from, which was printed in 1942. That's supposed to be, the M is supposed to be 2 dashes, not 3, all right, because if you go down to O is 3 dashes. Well, you can't have 3 dashes for both. It just looks like a typo or something. I don't know. It looks like a half a dash and a whole dash and another dash, so it's 2 dashes, and that's the only one I found that was screwy. All right, so what are we supposed to do here? We're supposed to design a program that asks the user to enter a string and then converts the string to Morse code. Pretty straightforward. Morse code is a code where each letter in the English alphabet, each digit and various punctuation characters are represented by a series of dots and dashes. Now, we're going to limit it to what they've got here, including uppercase and lowercase letters, since they're both the same value. Now, I use a space simply to make this easier. I use a space as a new line indicator in my output. Okay, and we could put a note on there saying, space equals enter key or return key or whatever. As you can see here, I've got the plain text. I've got a text box here. If it'll ever do anything, there's a label, a couple of labels here, and there's a label right there. And what I did, remember when you do labels, you have to be careful that you set them with some kind of a border, because if you don't, and you turn auto size off, it'll disappear on you. You'll have to do a window to select it and find it. Besides, it needs a border on it, and you need to set some properties. Like I set the font to 16 bold just so the dots and the dashes would look better, and basically I have a convert, a clear, and an exit button. So let's go to the code real quick and take a look at this. And I'm using what am I using? There's my regions. Remember to use regions when you got a lot of stuff to deal with. There's a region for form main. I have an extra credit version of this using images and storing them in a resource file and changing the size of the form to fit long lines of text and or Morse code and so forth. As you can see here, I have an exit button, a clear button, event handler, and then I've got some methods that I've created. Parse string, which means it's going to look at every character in the string. Get code is going to do a lookup to grab the character and look it up in a two-dimensional array, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I have a convert button. That's actually calls some of this other stuff. Now, let's go up to the top here. Notice that I'm not really using any of this stuff, so you can comment it out. Just make sure EXE is smaller. It'll be a grayer color if it's not using it. But notice what I am using: system.text.regular expressions. Let me talk to you about regular expressions. This is another way to kind of filter what they put, what the keyboard, what they put in, to a text box. Regular expressions came from Assembler, I think, or COBOL. I can't remember. It's one of the. I think it's probably COBOL. Anyway, it's a Linux. I'm sorry, it's a Linux feature. It's still there. And what you do is you have to import that with a using statement because we're going to be doing some stuff. And then up here in your partial class form main, which mine's called form main, under the declarations section, you have to declare this regex character or object. So it's private static, so it will maintain, right, its value regardless of where you are. Regex, and I used an underscore ischar. That's just the name of the child. The parent is regex, the child is underscore ischar. You call it whatever you want to. That's just, I saw that years ago on the net probably. And you're creating a new object of regex. Now this is how it filters, all right? You're going to call a method that looks at this filter and compares everything between these square brackets to make sure that that's in there. If it's not, it sort of filters it out. Now notice there is a space right here, okay? So I've got a comma, a period, a question mark, 0 through -9, that's 0 through 9, A through Z lowercase, A through Z uppercase, space. These are just characters that delineate the beginning and the end of the filter, which comes from the old Linux regular expressions, all right? And you'll see how that's used a little bit. Here we have public string. It's a 2D array, and I'm letting it size itself. I've called it ARR for array Morse. And here's my comma, and I've set it. Notice what I've done here. So the 0th column of this two-dimensional array will be the actual character I'm going to search for. And I'm going to search through all of this whole thing till I find a match. So let's just say I type in a comma. Well, it's going to find a match right here. And then in the column 1, it's going to grab the string equivalent of what I'm looking for. So all I'm doing here is doing a lookup function, okay? That's all it is. And you'll search through this array to see what they typed, what they typed in when you find a match. Like if they type a uppercase A or a lowercase a for that matter, it will find a dot dash because that's what it is. And again, like I said, I've assigned space a value of 0 because 0 is not going to be Morse code. And when I see a 0, I know I need to include a new line in the label string output because I'm using a space as a return. Okay, that's just what I'm doing. You'll find it. I think you'll find it easier to do it that way. There's nothing in form main. I was in a hurry. I'm leaving at 2 and coming back at 4:30 or 5. So I just, rather than fight it, I just took everything out of it. Like I said, this is a copy of a more complicated extra credit version of this. There's my button exit, button clear. Basically, it's just setting the text in the text box to empty, the label output.text to empty, and returning the focus to the text so they can type in another string should they desire. Okay, that's all that is. Let's see what we got. Okay, is input alphabetical. Now this is the one that's tied to the regex is char, right? It's using a match method. So it's creating a match method of M, right? And that's the child, and match is the parent object. M is just what I called it. Equals is char.match string. So it's passing in a string, and it's looking at this regex to see if it's in there. And it's either going to return true or false. If it returns false, depending on where you're calling, which is probably key press. See if it is. Nah, somewhere else. That's just that's limiting some of the functions, or excuse me, some of the characters in the text box. Where's it at? I'll have to look that up and see where it's being called. It's possible I eliminated it, but that is one way to do it. Let's see what we got here. Looks like I just did it with key press and key down. Let me go to key text change, see what we got. That's not it. Text change, I'm just depending on if there's anything in the text box after I trim it. If it's greater than 0, I enable the clear and the convert. If there are no chars, if it's not greater than 0, it has to be 0. It's not a -1 or any negative number. It's just the length of the characters. Then I'm setting the state back to, both of these buttons are set to false. And now here what I'm doing, and this is something you kind of knew. If I've got code already in a clear button, there's no need for me to duplicate it here, right? I'm just calling button clear dot perform click. And what that's going to do is actually going to fire a click event for that object, which is button clear, as if the user had clicked on it. So that's a cool way of not having to repeat yourself and reuse code. Let's see what we have here. Looks like I may have taken that functionality out for that regex, but it's something you might want to look at. I don't see it anywhere here. Sorry about that. Like I said, I was in a big hurry and I was trying to simplify this to what you're going to be doing. So it looks like I'm not even using that regex object in this particular one. I'll have to show you how that works, but it's pretty cool. I mean, I think you can see it's just filtering. You can put it in your key press or your key down event, and it does the same thing as what I've got here, which I've shown you before, is I'm just filtering. Oh, here it is. I'm calling it here. Okay, so in my text key press event handler, I'm calling this, which calls regex. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so it's a little bit different take on what I've shown you here. So basically it's saying if it equals false, then come in here and filter to see if it's a backspace. And if it's backspace, you set it equal to true. If it's not the backspace and it gets into here, if it's false, then you just basically, click the fire the clear button again. If it's true, then you don't do anything. It's an acceptable character. So that's how that works. You might want to look at that. And I could send you this after you complete it if you want me to. All right, so that solves that mystery. Now, let's go to the convert button. Here it is, my convert button. This is what actually does the converting. So the first thing I'm going to do is parse the string. So I call that method, and parse string is right here. Okay. And it takes no arguments, but what it's doing is it's grabbing the text out of the text box. And this is just a little temporary string I'm using to hold the characters. This is a global variable that I used, and I'm still setting it, I think, to determine if the buttons are on and off. That's not really important. But anyway, here's my try catch. So I'm going to loop through the length of this string, one character at a time, right? Using a for loop. And I'm I'm doing a lookup here, right? Get code. Get code's another function up here that I wrote. That's just to keep things nice and clean. You could put it all in one function, but it gets kind of dirty. So I'm passing in one character at a time, one char, and I'm setting this as a temporary variable. So I'm looking at the entire two-dimensional array. Okay. Now, since I already know that I'm going to be looking at column 0 for my number, I don't have to have a two-dimensional or a double for loop. I'm just using a one. Because what I'm going to be looking at is always going to be column 0, but my rows are going to change. So I'm going to look at each column 0 in every row until I find a match. All right. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just casing it to upper. Now, you could also go into the text box and set it to accept only uppercase characters, but then the user's going to go kind of crazy when they want to type a lowercase a or b. So I just do it this way because the uppercase and the lowercase have the same Morse code value. All right. So what I'm saying here, if I'm at this row position and I'm pulling that that character out that they typed in, whether it be a number or letter. If that equals converting it to a string and then using char2 upper with that letter there, if that's true, then I'm going to go ahead in that position. I'm going to return the Morse code equivalent of it. So let's go back up here and explain this one more time. Let's say that the user typed in an uppercase M or a lowercase m, all right? Well, we're going to loop through this thing after we've cased it to an uppercase until I find in this 0th column right here, column 0 for all these different rows, an M. And when I find an M, I'm going to grab this, and that's the Morse code equivalent, the dash dots and all that. And then that's essentially how it works. Now, for simplicity, remember I told you that I was just using a space for an enter key or a new line. So if the string code returns a 0, I'm just putting, this is an escape character in C#. You have to use double quotes. So it's \n new line. Otherwise, I'm just concatenating onto the text object, or the text property of the label output object. And there's a function of a string that you can use pad right, pad left. So I'm doing dot pad right and putting 6 characters in there. Now here's the problem. I tried a tab, but for a label in C# you can't put a tab in there. Now if I'd used a list box I could have, but I was in too big a hurry to worry about it. So this is just a quick and dirty fix. So it's going to put the character in and pad it 6, and then put the next character in and pad it 6, and so forth. Okay. And that kind of separates it and makes it a little easier to read. That's all it is. So I've got this function, which is get code. All right. And I've got this function, which is parse string. Parsing means to look at every component of the string. This is really not that complicated. All right. Once you figure out how to do it. Now, you can do it a different way if you don't want to do it this way. It's up to you. And there's my button convert click. Now, the tricky thing here is to make sure, in order to avoid problems, that, and you might want to take another look at that, because we're calling that within the key press event. And this is_char is based on the regex, or the regular expression that I declared as private static up here in the partial class. And that's got the filter in it. So play with that, use it. I think you'll find it interesting how it works. So I've got is input alphabetical, text change. All that does is just toggle if there's nothing in there, it sets button clear, button convert to true. Else, if it's greater than 0, it sets them both to true. If there's nothing in there, it sets them both to false, and then performs a clear by calling the button clear click event. That's another little tidbit that you hadn't seen before. Probably, maybe you have. Some of you probably know more about this than I do. So anyway, you can take a look at that, hopefully, and you can always pause this video. I think I've gone through everything where you can see what I'm doing. And that's just pre-initializing it. It just takes a little time to type it in from the book. Remember, M is 2 dashes, not 3, the way they've got it in the book. So let's compile it and run it. I want you to error out on me. I'm cutting this close. I'm trying to get this out so you can have a look at it tonight or before tonight. Come on. Well, take a coffee break. Go to the restroom. Go smoke a stogie while we wait. Gosh. I'm in for a new laptop. Maybe I'll get it. And you won't have to wait so long. Of course, you can always fast forward through it. It doesn't really matter, but makes the video bigger when I have to do this. All right, let's just put in an A, lowercase. There's my A. And then clear. Both buttons are disabled. Why? Because there's no need to click on these if there's nothing to convert or clear. We've already cleared it, and there's nothing to convert. So remember that the space is an enter key as far as our output goes. Now that's just my rule. That's not correct, but to make this doable and a little easier to navigate, that's why I did it. I didn't want to put a drop-down list in this thing right here. It's just too much trouble to deal with all the events. So let's type in something. A man a plan. Whoops. I see it, cleared it. Hang on. That's not working right. You'll have to overlook that. A plan. Whoops. Gosh, sorry. Teacher didn't know how to program. A plan. This is a palindrome, by the way. A canal, not that it matters. Panama. Okay. Oh, make sure you set the character length to about 80 on this text box up here. Otherwise, it's going to wrap and do all kind of crazy stuff. You just don't need it for what we're doing. Hope I spelled this right. Convert. A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Okay, boy, I just did have it big enough, didn't I? All right, so backspace gets everything, so you'll have to overlook that. I just didn't have time to get into the intricacies of it, and it's good enough for what we're doing. Let's do this is a test. All right, see what we get. There you go. And you could look all this up and see if it's right or whatever. Hopefully it is. Hope I didn't screw it up. This is a test. Now notice it won't take like an exclamation point. It won't take anything that's not in that filtered list using the regular expression filter. All right, so we're going to convert that. There's my 6 spaces in there. So you see that between everything. Otherwise, it'd all be jumbled up together and you really wouldn't be able to tell what's going on. Clear and exit. So that's it. There's a little bit of effort in it, but I want to introduce you to those few new concepts, especially regular expressions, now that I figured out what I'd done. This program was much, much larger, more complicated, so I just made a copy of it and stripped a bunch of stuff out, and I wasn't sure what was still there and what wasn't, but it's working good enough. So there you go. All right, well, I will see you in class, and I hope this helps.